Alright, let's see what else I can get rid of. Well, I finished playing Undertale, so why don't we just... Spoiler alert. Hello, I'm Tyler, this is the Imaginary Axis, and I recently finished playing Undertale. On the pacifist route, anyway. And if you're a gamer, chances are you've heard of this fairly recent indie game that used choice mechanics, gaming tropes, dogs, and resets to make itself one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time in just a few months. It's startling how quickly it became popular, and it's left a lot of people wondering why. On the surface, it looks like a basic adventure story. Kid falls down hole, wakes up in a world full of monsters, has to find a way out. It's a little interesting that the game has multiple endings, gives you the option to fight, and can even remember your choices if you play through it a second time, but are those mechanics really groundbreaking enough to call it the best game ever? I'm not so sure. It gives Undertale good replay value, but there has to be something else there. A deeper story underneath the child wandering home. Deeper than the choice between pacifist and genocide. Something about this adventure with monsters that teaches us about humans. Let's look at the basics. The story begins by telling you about an ancient war between monsters and humans. The humans won primarily because they have stronger souls and proceeded to seal the monsters underground with a magic barrier. At first, you might be inclined to think the monsters were a threat, but pretty much everything in the game denies this. From the ancient writings about the war to the fact most monsters are actually really nice to you. Their only reason for ever attacking you is either over a misunderstanding or the fact they need a human soul to escape the underground. And then you reset once or twice. Maybe you killed someone you didn't mean to, maybe you aren't satisfied with the ending, maybe Sans let a few too many hints slip, but the game blatantly reveals that every reset is canon. You have the power to rewind time, as long as you're still playing the game. This changes things. Drastically, because all of a sudden you aren't above consequences anymore. Every action you do really matters whether you save or not. But there is one action that matters even more than all the others. Genocide. If you choose to kill off every character in the underground, there's no going back. In the final room of the game, an entity called Chara will be summoned by your actions and destroy everything, only allowing you back in if you give up your soul and forfeit ever achieving a happy ending again. That's pretty intense. If you knew any better, you would just get the good ending and quit. But you won't, because of one very simple concept. The completion principle. A psychological drive we have to see things finished. You see, Undertale is filled with mysteries, from the characters to the locations to the events, and you can experience most of it by doing a few pacifist and neutral runs, but at least a good 25% of the story lies in the genocide route. And gamers aren't stupid, usually. We know that. After you get a good grasp on the morality system and how your kill count affects the game, it's only a matter of time before you realize there's a whole side to this world you haven't even touched on yet. A side that requires killing all those friends you made and attacking monsters you clearly know are innocent by now, but something compels you. The Zeigarnik effect. That uncomfortable feeling you get when something is left unfinished. What happens if I kill everyone, you ask? I've grown so attached to these characters, but I just have to know what happens. If you've ever watched part of a movie, read part of a book, or been interrupted during the middle of a project, you know what I'm talking about. It stays in your mind. You keep coming back to it. Our brains are programmed to want more, even if it means sacrificing a happy ending. But that doesn't say anything about us, right? There's nothing wrong with ripping a bunch of fictional characters away from their happy timeline and killing them. I mean, technically, we're not the ones doing it anyway. It's our character. And this is how the game was meant to be played. If it wasn't supposed to be played this way, then the game maker wouldn't have included it as an option. Say, maybe it's his fault for making such an evil game to begin with. But if you're having any of these thoughts, then you know something's wrong. You're experiencing cognitive dissonance, a discomfort that arises when your actions don't match up with your beliefs. It's the thing that prompts you to say, well, it was okay for me to break my diet this once because I never get to have pie. One part of your brain is saying, I shouldn't be doing this, but you're justifying it. It's particularly interesting if you use the "this is how the game was made" argument, because in that case you're resolving the conflict by pushing responsibility off onto the game creator, an authority figure who technically gave you permission to do this. In July of 1961, a series of experiments were held in a basement at Yale University. A professor named Stanley Milgram was interested in learning why normal people do evil things. Like the Nazis in World War II, a group of common men under orders to commit genocide. The experiments involved 3 people: the experimenter, who acted as an authority figure, the teacher, who had volunteered for the experiment, and the learner, who was in on the experiment as well. The experimenter and teacher would sit in one room with a control panel, and the learner would sit alone in the room next to them. During the experiment, the teacher was supposed to read off a list of word pairs that the learner would attempt to memorize, but if he made a mistake, the teacher would flip a switch that administered an electric shock to the learner. The shocks increased each time the learner failed to respond correctly, but eventually...
Let me out of here! You have no right to keep me here! Let me out! Let me out of here! Let me out!
Continue, please.
Let me out of here!
You would think that would be the end of the experiment, but as long as someone was in the room to tell the teacher to keep going, 65% of the test subjects would continue shocking the learner even after they stopped responding altogether. Why? Authority. It's not my fault. As long as there's someone around for you to reasonably assert blame on, your brain can silence its cognitive dissonance. But not in Undertale. Everything in the genocide run works like clockwork to activate your cognitive dissonance. The characters make it very clear that it's you killing them. They won't let you blame the designer. Your character isn't even on screen when they beg for mercy. They're looking at you. Even Flowey starts directly blaming you for everyone's deaths, talking about how he used to be able to save and reset too. He got bored. He explored every way to solve everyone's problems, but he had to know what would happen if he killed them. Sound familiar? You're officially being associated with the main villain. The game is doing everything it can to activate your cognitive dissonance, but you keep moving forward. Does the Zeigarnik effect really have that big a hold on you? Well, let's look at some of the other reasons you might have to play the genocide route. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a list intentionally similar to the food pyramid that displays everything a human being needs to stay healthy. At the bottom, we have physiological needs, things you literally can't live without. Move a little higher and we have safety and security, but when we get to the top 3, we have needs that can be satisfied by playing video games. Things like a sense of belonging, self-esteem, fulfilling your potential. You don't necessarily need it to survive, but when you achieve something worthwhile, your brain releases dopamine, a chemical substance that acts as a reward mechanism. It's that sense of achievement you get for beating a video game, for befriending the characters, for being a gamer. So what does Undertale do if you decide to play the genocide route? It takes that pyramid and demolishes it. This entire section of the game gives you nothing but reasons not to play it. Your sense of belonging is destroyed when you kill off monsters you've grown attached to. Your self-esteem is crushed when characters treat you like a psychopath. And your potential is wasted in the eyes of everyone except for Flowey, who you probably didn't like to begin with. The upbeat music is gone, all the puzzles are solved, you have to grind constantly, there are no jokes, no mini-games, you can't satisfy your cognitive dissonance, and everyone is asking you why. Because you're determined. Determined to find the end of the game just because it's incomplete. Not out of any desire for a happy ending or to have your needs fulfilled, but because the Zeigarnik effect compels you. If you've played this far, you aren't doing it for fun anymore. You're barely even in control anymore. You're only going forward because a psychological tick is making you. And the final proof of this argument is Sans. A character who did nothing but help you out and pal around with you in every other run of the game. The only main character who has never tried to kill you, either by accident or on purpose, directly or indirectly. He stops you in the final corridor to give you a boss fight that purposefully borders on unfair. And you can say a lot about that boss fight. Definitely more than I have time to say here. But would you really call it fun? This is a fight that takes some people over 100 attempts to beat. Some gamers spend hours tediously memorizing this one boss fight just to kill off one of the most popular characters in the game who has done the least harm to you up until this point. Is it really worth it? When you get to the end, your reward is just completion, in exchange for never having a happy ending again. The underground is lost, and if you decide to go back and make things right, it's too late. At the end of a genocide route, Chara will tell you that they were with you the whole time. That the feeling you get when your stats increase is Chara. The one driving you forward, the one brought back to life by your determination. You may have beaten the game, but did you win? There are a lot of battles in Undertale. There are a lot of battles in most video games. But how often do you get to explore a battle in your own mind? Your desire for a happy ending, for belonging, esteem, and self-actualization, versus your simple desire to complete a game. It still might not be the best game ever, but that struggle for self-control, to determine which urges we should act on and which we should suppress, is a real battle we fight every day. That's the true battle between good and evil. And we all have a little bit of Chara in us. But games like Undertale do their best to remind us of the consequences we face when indulging that, and how much brighter a happy ending can be. So do what you can to find your own happy ending. And remember, you're the only one responsible for your choices. Be sure to make good ones. Until then.